Most empires are built on purpose with years of super smart planning, but this is a $50 billion empire that was created by one single catastrophic mistake. This is the insane story of how one of the biggest companies in the world betrayed another and accidentally created a rival that would spend the next 30 years trying to destroy them. This isn't some boring story from a textbook. This is about pride, humiliation, and revenge on a scale so massive, it's literally like a movie. This is the unbelievable story of how Nintendo humiliated Sony, and in doing so created the PlayStation. Now get this, in the late 1980s, Nintendo was literally everything in gaming. They were the undisputed king. And in this world, the unthinkable was about to happen. Nintendo and Sony were going to make a console together. Just stop and imagine that for a second. The creators of Mario partnering with the masters of electronics. If this happened, they would have controlled 100% of the gaming universe. It would have been game over for everyone else. The plan was simple. Nintendo's amazing games, Sony's insane hardware. Together, they would create the future of gaming and make billions. But then, at a giant tech show in 1991, Nintendo publicly betrayed Sony in front of the entire world, and it changed gaming forever. This is the crazy story of how one mistake started a 30-year war and gave all of us the PlayStation. Before the betrayal, you need to meet this guy, Ken Kutaragi. Today we know him as the father of the PlayStation, but back then he was just a super talented and stubborn engineer at Sony. And he had a vision that literally no one else at his company had. In the 1980s, all the old execs at Sony thought that video games were a joke, just toys for kids. But Kutaragi knew that they were wrong. He saw the future. He bought his daughter an NES, and after watching her play, he was hooked. But he was also an engineer, and he thought the games were amazing, but the sound was horrible. Kutaragi knew that he could make it 10 times better. So he did something insane. Without telling a single one of his bosses, he started working with Nintendo in secret. On his own time, he designed a new sound chip for the Super Nintendo. This chip, the SPC700, was a masterpiece. It's the reason that the SNES has the legendary sound that we all remember. When his bosses at Sony found out, they were furious. They were going to fire him on the spot. Imagine the head of Coca-Cola secretly making a better recipe for Pepsi. It was treason. But just before they fired him, the literal president of Sony, Norio Oga, stepped in. Oga saw Kutaragi as a genius and that video games would make them billions. Oga personally saved his job. The sound chip was a huge success, and Ken Kutaragi had just kicked open the door to the gaming world. After the success of the sound chip, Nintendo and Sony got serious. Kutaragi pushed for an even crazier project, a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo. In an age of cartridges, CDs were basically magic. A cartridge could hold a tiny bit of data, but a CD could hold everything. It wasn't even close. Nintendo had to have this technology to crush their rival Sega. And who better to team up with than Sony, the company that invented the compact disc? It was a perfect match. So around 1989, they signed the contract. Sony would build a new console with Nintendo, and it would be called the PlayStation. This thing was a monster. It was designed to play all the old Super Nintendo cartridges and brand new giant games from CDs. For Sony, this was their big shot. Their name would finally be on a gaming console. It was everything. Kutaragi's team went all in. They didn't just draw it on paper, they built 200 working prototypes. The machine looked incredible. It was powerful. It was the future, and this was the biggest team up in history. What could possibly go wrong? It's 1991 at the biggest tech show in the world. On day one, Sony gets on stage with the whole world watching. They proudly announce their partnership with Nintendo and reveal the PlayStation. The crowd goes absolutely crazy. Ken Kutaragi is there in the audience watching his dream, the project he bet his entire career on, finally come true. But back in Japan, the president of Nintendo, Hiroshi Yamauchi, was freaking out. He reread the contract and found one insane detail that made him go nuts. The contract gave Sony the sole licensing rights for all games published on the new CD format. To you, that's just legal words. To Nintendo, it was war. That means Sony would control all the software and all the money from CD games. Nintendo's entire business was built on taking a cut of every game sold, so giving that control to Sony was like a king giving away the keys to his kingdom. They weren't giving away a piece of the pie, they were giving away the entire bakery. So President Yamauchi made one of the most ruthless decisions in business history. Without even calling Sony, he secretly flew to Europe and signed a new deal with Philips, one of Sony's biggest corporate rivals. Then came the very next day at the tech show. It was Nintendo's turn. Everyone, including the entire Sony team, thought that they were going to be celebrating the partnership. Instead, a Nintendo executive walked up the same stage and announced that Nintendo was now partnering with Philips. He didn't even say Sony's name. The room went completely silent. Sony executives were publicly and brutally humiliated in front of the entire industry. Kutaragi's dream was destroyed on the world stage, and in that moment, Nintendo thought that they had won. They had no idea they had just started a war. Back at Sony's headquarters, the executives were furious. They wanted to sue Nintendo into the ground. But Ken Kutaragi, the guy who was betrayed the most, told them to stop. He had an even crazy idea. He argued that this public humiliation was actually a gift. If Nintendo is this scared of us, he begged, it proves that we have to be in the gaming industry. After another deal with Philips fell apart and even a failed attempt to team up with their enemy Sega, Sony's gaming dreams were dead. So Kutaragi stood in front of Norio Oga, the president of Sony, the man who saved his job, but this time he wasn't asking to help Nintendo, he was asking for an army to destroy them. Fueled by pure revenge, Kutaragi made his pitch. Forget Nintendo, let's build our own console. We'll take the tech we built for them, make it even better, and use it to crush them. Many people at Sony thought this was just insane. It was way too risky, but President Oga, still furious from the humiliation, made his decision. He famously said, "Let's do it." In that moment, the PlayStation project was back from the dead. But it wasn't a partnership, it was an instrument of revenge. Kutaragi's new team had a clear plan. Do the exact opposite of everything Nintendo does. Nintendo made it expensive and hard for developers to make games. So Sony made it cheap and easy. Nintendo focused on a family-friendly audience. So Sony went after the older, more mature audience Nintendo was ignoring. And most importantly, they built the entire console around the CD, which was powerful and cheap to make games for. The only company that stood to lose was Nintendo. The Sony PlayStation launched in Japan in late 1994, and it exploded. 9 months later, it launched in America and changed gaming forever. Meanwhile, Nintendo was about to make another massive mistake. With their new console, the Nintendo 64, they stuck with old-fashioned cartridges. The difference this created was just insane. N64 games were super expensive to make, but the real difference was storage space. You're not going to believe this, but a typical N64 cartridge could hold at most 64 megabytes of data. A single PlayStation CD could hold 660 megabytes. That is more than 10 times the space. That's the difference between a single sheet of paper and a 10-volume encyclopedia. This gigantic leap in storage changed gaming forever. It allowed for movie-like cutscenes, amazing audio, and huge 3D worlds that were simply impossible on a cartridge. Developers ran to Sony. The biggest blow to Nintendo came when the creators of Final Fantasy, a series that was only on Nintendo for years, announced that they were leaving Nintendo for Sony. Their new game, Final Fantasy VII, was so massive that it came on 3 separate discs. It was a game that was literally impossible to put on an N64 cartridge. That one single game sold millions of PlayStation consoles all by itself. And then came all the other legendary games that you could only get on PlayStation. There was the masterpiece Metal Gear Solid, the terrifying Resident Evil, the super realistic Gran Turismo, and the awesome adventures of Tomb Raider. The final sales numbers tell the whole crazy story. The Nintendo 64 sold a respectable 33 million consoles, but the original PlayStation sold over 100 million. It didn't just beat Nintendo, it completely crushed them, outselling them 3-1. Ken Kutaragi had gotten his revenge. So I have a question for all of you. Looking back, do you think that Nintendo was making a smart business move to protect its profits, or was this the single biggest, most self-destructive mistake in the history of gaming? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. That one act of betrayal at that tech show changed the entire gaming industry forever. By trying to protect its own crown, Nintendo literally created the rival that would challenge them for the next 3 decades. The PlayStation brand, born from revenge, grew so massive that it became Sony's most profitable division for decades. Of course, Nintendo is still here. The Wii and the Nintendo Switch were huge successes. They're not going anywhere, but they have never again had the insane, undisputed market domination that they had before the PlayStation came along. For basically the last 30 years, Sony has been at the top. And even today in 2025, the PlayStation 5 is an absolute monster, continuing that legacy. This story is, quite literally, the origin story of the modern console wars. This crazy rivalry gave us gamers more competition, more innovation, and more choices than ever before. But it all started with one single mistake. Nintendo thought that they were swatting away a tiny problem, but instead, they accidentally created a $50 billion empire that would grow to tower over them. I'm Rob, and if this breakdown played games with your strategic thinking, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss more breakdowns just like this.
For more trending brand news, subscribe to our channel and visit designrush.com.